Hello, this is Colin Liddell, and this is a short 5 to 10 minute long podcast updating readers and listeners of matters relating to the site. Today is the 9th of September. It's almost a month after Charlottesville, a much commented on event. Now, of course, this event led to the massive purge against the alt-right, with numerous sites shut down, demonetized in various ways, and having various internet services removed. And now a lot of the sites of the alt-right are struggling to recover and rebuild. It's actually rather like the hurricanes sweeping across parts of America. Houston and now Florida. A lot of things get blown down, but after the winds die down, the steady work of rebuilding goes on. Now, at the time when Charlottesville happened, there was a lot of black pills being thrown around. My take on Charlottesville from the start was that it was actually a success for the alt-right. And the reason I said that at the time was because the alt-right was actually being disciplined. We were telling our people not to resort to violence, but only to use it in self-defense, whereas the left were completely endorsing thuggish acts of violence against anybody who was actually there, even innocent bystanders and TV camera crews, etc. And even though the narrative was heavily spun and a lot was hung upon it, namely the attempt to deplatform the alt-right, the truth soon started to come out. We had that very strong performance by President Trump, where he said both sides were to blame, which wasn't strictly true, but it was turning things back to the truth. Since then, it's come out that the woman who actually died in this still very mysterious car incident died of a heart attack. And it seems like she wasn't even struck by the car. But even that's not that important, because you can't account for every lone lunatic that might or might not be attracted to your movement. The key point is the movement itself has to take a strong position and tell its members not to engage in acts of violence, which is what the alt-right totally did. Okay, there were a few loose cannon, a few people who got carried away in the heat of the moment. I mean, Christopher Cantwell's probably an example, although he didn't actually do anything particularly wrong. He just, showed off his guns a bit too much and flirted with a Vice reporter. We had a few idiots chanting sort of counterproductive slogans. I'd say people like Asmodor. There was this one mysterious figure with a Nazi flag, but that guy obviously seems more and more like some kind of ADL shill. And so in total, the alt-right turned up and they conducted themselves with reasonably good discipline and decorum, and they didn't do anything particularly wrong, and they actually stood up for themselves very well when they were attacked. And though the lying media were going in so heavily against them, that actually worked the other way. The media started, as usual, because of their constant lying and spin, they started to lose credibility, and the alt-right narrative started to gain credibility. So I think we're actually coming out of Charlottesville quite well, and that was my take at the time, and I think things have actually moved increasingly in that direction. But having said that, there are still a lot of problems left over post Charlottesville, and I think it's been a bit of a wake-up call to the alt-right. It's made people a lot more aware about how to present themselves well, because really the alt-right, even the white nationalist aspect of the alt-right, because the alt-right is after all still a very wide-ranging movement in my opinion, but even the white nationalist side of the alt-right seems to realise the importance of presenting the message in a way which is much more acceptable for normal people. It's not an extreme message. White nationalism, identity politics for the last group not to have identity politics, that is not an extreme idea. The way that things are going, the way society is developing, breaking up, balkanizing, losing social trust, these ideas are becoming more and more appealing to normal people. And so it's a case of we don't really have to push too hard. People are going to come to us before too long. And if we do push, we have to push in the right ways and not in these very obvious negative neo-Nazi kind of ways, which I've discussed in several articles about the Daily Stormer. We have to present an image that is acceptable to all sorts of people, and which doesn't mean that they have to dox themselves from life and become complete outcasts and jobless freaks. So I think a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people in the alt-right who were kind of flirting with that trollish, stormerish side of the alt-right, I think they are starting at least to have doubts about that, and they are starting to kind of open their mind to a more reasonable, more mainstream kind of approach. Not everybody, of course, but I think that seems to be one of the trends that is blowing across the alt-right. Now, we've managed to set ourselves up at a new site after we got showered by Blogger. The reason we got showered by Blogger was explained with one word in an email that they sent us. Reason for closing us down: hate. Which is laughable because amongst all the sites in the alt-right, alternativeright.blogspot.com kept its approach focused on the intellectual side. We avoided racial slurs. We focused on ideas. We focused on interesting topics connected to the entire spectrum of the alt-right, not just nationalism. And we kept everything quite reasonable, and we couched things in moral terms. But of course, the brand name Alternative Right, that was probably the main reason they closed us down, because we had the brand name Alternative Right, which certain other actors, who you can name for yourself, tried to make the brand toxic. Now, in a sense, the brand is semi-toxic. That is kind of inevitable, because it's going completely against the past prevailing moral and ideological flow, which is, of course, this kind of like liberal, egalitarian, globalist bullshit that's going to just completely dissolve the world into this real fucking globalist mishmash and human slurry. Now, we're going directly against that, so of course we're going to be at least semi-toxic. There have been people who have been trying to make us more toxic. Sometimes I think they are for sincere but misguided reasons, and sometimes I think they are for insincere reasons of sabotage. But the thing is, the alt-right is still aligned with the main trends in which the world is moving. And in the West, we're moving much more into a kind of identitarian phase, not just for various minorities, but for everybody. And that's been brought about by multiculturalism and mass immigration. Those are facts on the ground, and the alt-right is a response to that. So, in a sense, we are semi-toxic because we're going against the past prevailing flow, but ultimately, we are heading in a direction which aligns with the interests of most normal people. So, what you'll see is more and more people coming round to our way of thinking, and the message becoming less and less toxic. And I believe it will become more and more mainstream and acceptable to more and more people. Now, a key part of that is the revolutionary trajectory. Now, the alternative right is a kind of revolutionary movement. I'd say it's a revolutionary metapolitical movement rather than a revolutionary political movement. So, analogies can be drawn with past political revolutionary movements, but there are also important differences. The main one being that we don't actually have the reins of political power. But if you look at things at a metapolitical level, I think the position is actually quite different. There, the alt-right is becoming ascendant, it's becoming, in certain senses, hegemonic. And now that might be obscured by the fact that we don't actually have political control of the various organs of the mass media, but regardless of that, we're still getting our message out there. So in a metapolitical sense, we're much, much stronger than we in fact appear politically. Now, we are a metapolitical revolutionary movement, and so certain similarities exist with political revolutionary movements. Now, I think you've seen this with the alt-right, as with the French Revolution, as with the Russian Revolution. The alt-right metapolitical revolution, it started out with less extreme revolutionary elements. I mean, for example, in the French Revolution, there were the Girondists, who were then pushed aside by the Jacobins. And in the case of the Russian Revolution, you had I think it was the February or March Revolution, which installed Kerensky, which was then pushed aside by the Bolsheviks. So that's part of the process of revolutions. And so in the alternative right metapolitical revolution, you had certain elements like neo-reactionaries, more middle-of-the-road characters like, say, Ramsay Paul and so on, who were then kind of pushed aside by these more extreme elements. That would be people like, I'd say, the Right Stuff group, and of course the kind of Stormer Collective. And in the same way that the Jacobins and the Bolsheviks hijacked their revolutions, those elements also hijacked the alternative right metapolitical revolution. But if you look further down the road with this revolutionary analogy, what happens in these revolutions is these more extreme elements are then later pushed aside themselves. In the case of France, the Jacobins, Robespierre and co., they were all taken to the guillotine, actually. And in the case of the Bolshevik Revolution, the kind of real hardline revolutionary Bolsheviks, represented by the likes of Trotsky, were basically pushed aside by a much more conservative element represented by Stalin. Now, those are two revolutions I could refer to. Another one you can throw in is the National Socialist Revolution in Germany, which follows the same trajectory. So what I'm predicting here is that as the alternative right rebuilds, and as it draws strength from the prevailing trends, the alt-right metapolitical revolution is going to start to mimic those earlier revolutions as it starts to develop a much broader based message that is aligned not just to the interests of the mass of the people, but also to the moral sensibilities of the mass of the people. And that's going to mean a lot of the elements that we now associate with the alternative right will actually end up being thrown overboard. Okay, that's all I've got to say for today. Trying to keep this short, it's quite hard. But anyway, over and out. Thank you for listening.